The Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, joining you from the lands of the Insultion-speaking peoples of the Okanagan Nations, where I live in the country, a short drive away from a small town known as Summerland, BC. I'm very excited for you to hear this conversation today, my friends. I've meant to have this guest on the show for a long time, and things have finally aligned really nicely with our rhythms recently. And when I heard about her latest offering, it felt like the right moment to move into more connection with each other, but specifically around this topic. My guest today is Dra.Rocio Rosales-Meza. Rocio is a former academic with a background in counseling psychology who currently works at what I would describe as the intersection of ancestral veneration, decolonization, and health. And by health, I mean physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health and well-being. Through her courses and mentoring programs, she helps people unlearn colonial programming and embody their gifts. As of this recording, registration is currently open for her program designed specifically for white folks and biracial white folks. And because I followed Rocio for some time, and I've seen her quote many of the iconic teachers and revolutionaries that I personally find inspiring and instructive. Like I've seen and heard Rocio reference people like Frantz Fanon, Bell Hooks, Assata Shakur, some of the figures that I admire most, that most fascinate me in the movement for Black liberation. So because of that, I thought it would be very worthwhile to have a conversation with Rocio about decolonizing our minds and hearts and doing the deeper spiritual work needed to become a reliable and useful accomplice and co-conspirator in the movement towards liberation and justice for all. I hope, and I really feel, I believe that no matter what your racialized identity, you'll find something in this conversation that is mobilizing, that's inspiring, or that's just comforting. So, Rocio, what identities do you lead with?
A mama. I'm an unschooling mama. I'm an eldest daughter of an eldest daughter of an orphan daughter. And so that experience is very much a part of who I am and how I see the world. I come from a matriarchal lineage. Soy mexicana, chicana, and that's very important. I'm also a wife, and not in a patriarchal way, but I just really love my husband and my family. And so being a wife and mother is really important to me. I'm also a seer, a medicine woman in the Quero Inca lineage. And yeah.
Can we talk more about your background? I'd love to begin with just a bit more about who your people are, where you grew up. Maybe you could describe the path you've taken to arrive here in this moment, where you are in the world, doing the work that you do.
Yes, thank you for that question. So I have a PhD in counseling psychology, and I no longer practice in that way. I chose not to be licensed because I don't agree with the way that the current mental health system diagnoses people for very appropriate reactions that they're having to colonial, capitalist, patriarchal empire. And when people hear that I have a PhD, maybe some of the assumptions are that I come from a family of PhDs, and that's not true. I am the first generation born in el norte, we say, which means on this side of the border. And that feels more true to me because borders are colonial in Turtle Island. But I'm the first generation born here. My parents are from Jalisco, Mexico. And I grew up poor working class, raised by a single mother. And all of that is has really informed my worldview and the work that I do. And so the work that I do around decolonization is not just coming from a book, but it's really a remembering from my ancestors and also an experience of seeing what has happened to my own lineage and to my own family. I was also raised Mexican Catholic. And so I say Mexican Catholic because it's a very different experience than other Catholics. My indigenous ancestors hid much of their traditional belief systems and rituals within Catholicism. And so that's a unique experience. And so, in that way, I find that they were very intelligent, that they hid much of our knowledge, our belief systems, our traditions, our rituals in ways where it could survive. Um, and so all of that makes up a part of who I am.
Mm. You mentioned the identity of seer and your spiritual lineage. Can you share a little bit more with us about your spiritual lineage
Mhm.
that comes from that indigeneity, and maybe a little bit about your process of initiation or reclamation or rediscovery of those
Mhm.
lineages?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. And the reason why I mentioned being Mexican Catholic is because my parents, my grandparents, they also hold these supernatural spiritual gifts. But because of the church, they didn't see it in that way. And maybe even hid it sometimes because it was discouraged in Catholicism. And so for me, part of my experience, part of my generation has been that reclamation of the things that were discouraged by colonization. And so as a child, I remember seeing spirits. I remember seeing people who were not here in the physical form, right? And also just knowing things or sensing things. And because of colonization, Catholicism, that was not communicated to me. So as a child, I became afraid of those things because no one was talking to me about what they meant. And so when, as a child, you don't have someone sharing these experiences with you or normalizing them, then you become afraid of them. And that was my experience as a child. And so my life, the first half of my life, I would say, was trying to do everything possible to almost get rid of those gifts, and they would follow me everywhere, and my ancestors would follow me everywhere. And um, and so there's a part of me that holds grief about that, that holds grief that for the little me who felt scared and who wasn't able to see those things as gifts. I have grief for my mother and my abuelita who were not able to see their gifts as gifts and felt like they had to suppress them. Maybe even there were some people in my lineage who felt like it was a pathology to have these gifts. And so I do hold some grief over that. And for me now, the reclamation feels bigger than the grief. And especially as a mother, because I've been able to teach my child these things and normalize it for them, that their gifts are strengths, are gifts, and our connection to the earth is natural and is something that we should cultivate. Our connection to the spirits is natural and something that we should strengthen. And so that reclamation piece is uh, feels sweeter and bigger now in this stage in my life than the grief. And so the medicine and the gifts that I have are lineage gifts in my blood lineage. And then my medicine lineage is the Quero-Inca lineage. And that is not directly in my blood lineage, but it's an open lineage. And it is still Mesoamerica. And so we have common ancestors. And I am initiated into that lineage and I continue in apprenticeship with that lineage. And I feel like it's really important to have lineage, especially in these times, especially with spirituality, to have elders that remind us about integrity, about right relationship, and that lead us back to those things that are important because it can be so easy to be confused in these times.
Mm-hmm. How old were you when you started to step into that reclamation? If growing up in a family that was in denial or denied or where that was taboo and secret,
Mm,
how did you find a path to
mm,
reclaim? And I'm very curious what like your mother and your grandmother think of the
mm,
work that you do
yeah.
or talking about it.
Yes, thank you for that question. So I would say that my whole life has been reclamation at the first half of my life at an unconscious level. Because while I wanted to suppress the gifts, they were still there. There were things that I just knew that I sensed, and I have as probably other people that might be listening that have spiritual gifts, those moments where your friends or your family members are thinking, you share something with them and they say, how did you know that, or how did you know that I was feeling that way? So my whole life I've received that and I've heard that from my family and friends. And so I think it existed at an unconscious level. And then the career that I chose was as a therapist, and also sort of using those gifts. Although once I entered academia, it was sort of funneled in a different way. I earned my PhD. I did a clinical internship. And then I actually chose the professorship route versus the clinician route. And the reason why I did that was because it was hard for me to set emotional boundaries with the people that I worked with. And so I felt at the time like I'm just not good at this. I'm not a good therapist because I can't just cut that off. I still care about what's happening with my client and how they're feeling. And so because of the training that I received, I felt like I just wasn't good at it and I needed to be better at setting boundaries. And so I chose the professorship route. I That career was short of a decade, so 9 years. I earned tenure. Um, I published. I had excellent teaching ratings. I did community service, and then I earned tenure. And tenure means that the university grants you a position for life. You have job security, career security for life. And so I felt like, oh, I did it and my family is safe. And now I can help my family for life. And that is the whole reason why I decided to pursue a PhD, not because I wanted to be a PhD or I thought that was cool. Like I didn't even know that existed. And I'm grateful that when I went to college, I had mentors, Black and Indigenous mentors that helped me through that process. And at that time, it was a decision where I felt like I could be in position to help my family financially and help my community as well. And then I chose a professorship route. I earned tenure. And I would say about 3 or 4 years after I earned tenure, about three, my body started to break down. Um, my body started to say, no, I can't do this. And that's because I exploited my body to get a PhD. I would hardly eat. Coffee was a meal, like a twice a day meal sometimes. Sleep was very hard to come by, was very little. I was extremely unbalanced. And this is normalized in academia where it's all about the work. Um, so it was a very unhealthy environment that is encouraged in academia, even after you earn your degree, even after you earn tenure. It never stops. It asks more and more and more of you. And so, of course, my body finally said no. And it was because of that toxic environment and those toxic habits that I picked up. It's also because now I know I'm a highly sensitive person that absorbs other people's emotions. Those are part of my gifts. I also am the eldest daughter, so I was caring for everyone else. So my life was just so unbalanced, and I had a health collapse. I developed a chronic migraine disability, and I became pregnant. And that's when, now as I look back, my body said, it's almost as if it said, like, I can't do both of these. I'm either going to grow a baby or you're going to keep doing this.
Mm.
So I just had really painful, debilitating migraines where I couldn't even get up out of bed. I Light was painful. It was really debilitating. And the sad, when I think about that time, what's so sad is that a year prior to that, I was in pain. So it's not that it appeared out of nowhere. There was a whole year before that where I was in chronic pain, and I had just normalized that. I thought that this is just normal. At the end of the day, I'm going to be in complete pain, and I would just get home and I would collapse on the couch and I was just done for the day. And then I would get up the next day and I would do it. And that was the cycle.
Mm.
And so I had to take a medical leave because my body just collapsed. And on that medical leave, I birthed a baby. Um, and then once I birthed my baby, I thought I might get better, and it didn't get better. And I requested another leave, and my university said, yes, okay, we'll give you another leave. And in the midst of organizing that leave, trying to figure out how I was going to come back after that leave, one day I received a letter in the mail that said I lost my position.
Oh.
And I didn't know what that meant. And I started to panic. What does that mean? And I called HR and I asked them to explain, and that they let me know I didn't have a position. And I asked them to explain again. And essentially that meant I was fired.
Whoa.
And so that rocked my world. um, and and so there's just so many layers there. My whole world collapsed. The tower card moment happened for me. A dark night of the soul. How is this possible? Who am I if I'm not a professor? Because this came with so much sacrifice, not just my sacrifices, but my mama's sacrifices. And now, how is this even possible? I have tenure. And how am I going to provide for my family? Because my family was dependent on my income. And so it felt like the end of the world for me. And I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed, and just really deeply questioning who I was and how this happened. And while that was really painful at the time, and I don't want to spiritually bypass it, it was deeply painful. And I was scared about what was going to happen for my family. It also, that moment really helped me to see clearly that there is no safety in the colonial paradigm, that at any moment it could collapse. At any moment, they can discard you, especially if you're a Black Indigenous person, a Black Indigenous woman. Um, and so that really awakened my consciousness. And from that moment on, after the grief period and the spiritual surrender, then is where I consciously stepped into my spiritual gifts. That is where I consciously began to live my life in a spiritually aligned way and a decolonial way.
Mm. And now you offer mentorship to therapists, and you have various offerings, but on your website currently, um, you talk about decolonial shadow work for
Mm-hmm.
white people.
Mm-hmm.
Can you parse for us what that means exactly? Tell us what decolonialism means to you and what is
Mm-hmm.
the shadow aspect?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, decolonization in and of itself, I use the work of Dr. Michael Yellowbird as one, and there's many Indigenous peoples that speak to decolonization. And so I make it clear that decolonization is in a movement of Indigenous peoples, and that it needs to be led by Indigenous peoples. And also, there is room and roles for white people as well, as allies, as accomplices. But it's important that it is led by Indigenous peoples because it is about sovereignty, self determination for Indigenous peoples. It is about land back, right? Returning Indigenous lands to Indigenous hands because they are the original stewards and have been in relationship with these lands for thousands of years and know how to steward the land. And so it's about returning to Indigenous earthways and about, and I'm pausing because I'm hearing some thoughts about some people who believe, does that mean we kick out all the white people? Is that what land back means? And maybe there's some people that believe that, right? There's some Indigenous peoples that believe that, and they have every right to believe that because there's been so much harm that has been done. And the majority of Indigenous peoples and what the land back movement means is Indigenous stewardship. And how do we live in harmony and balance? Now that we're here, how do we live in right relationships? So that's what decolonization means to me. And I take the lead from the Indigenous elders that have come before me that have led this movement for much longer.
So the shadow work in
Mm-hmm.
decolonial shadow work, what are
Yes.
you asking of the white people that you're inviting into this
Yes.
process?
So, what I have found in 25 years of doing this work is that there's a lot of white people who agree with anti-racism work, who agree I do hold white privilege, who now in the more recent years agree with the decolonial movement, and yet they still perpetuate colonial ways unconsciously. And so this is the shadow work piece. You agree with the decolonial movement. You want to support Indigenous peoples. And you also want, on some level, you understand, just as intergenerational trauma works, that because I come from peoples that have colonized lands, others, right, Black, Indigenous people of color, then I also need to see the ways that I have inherited those ways, those belief systems. And so that's the work part. How is this in your unconscious? How is this out of your awareness? For those that really want to show up in right relationship, doing that inner work so that you can break the cycle in your lineage, so that you can show up in integrity in the movement, so that also you can be well, because the truth is that colonization has harmed us all, and I think that's important as well to speak about. Of course it has harmed Black, Indigenous people of color, Mother Earth the most, but it has also harmed white people. And this is, um, I think, sometimes controversial to speak about. But I think it's an important piece that we also need to see the ways that white people were harmed. And maybe this is the medicine woman in me and the therapist in me, right? We know that people that inherited trauma continue to behave in abusive ways if they don't do the inner work to heal from that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I can also see tremendous value in this type of work, the decolonial shadow work, and looking at the ways that we have been harmed and colonized, and our psyches are colonized to perpetuate unconsciously
Mhm.
systems of hierarchy and entitlement and things like that. But I can see it also just not just helping us become more effective as accomplices and
Yes.
co-conspirators, but just bringing in our skin kin that we don't want to claim. That,
Yes.
like, at some point we have to be responsible for the rise of
Yes.
fascism, and
Yes.
that means that we have to be responsible for our family members, our
Yes.
partners, our, the school systems. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, I can see it being very helpful in many ways. But how is your work then different from anti-racism, or how do you distinguish it from DEI?
Mhm.
And maybe it's about the spirituality piece, but how is that important to the work as well?
Yes. So I believe that anti-racism work is important and necessary. And I think that white people that want to show up to change the world for the better and want to do their part to dismantle oppressive systems, that anti-racism work needs to be a part of that. And it shouldn't end there. And the reason why I don't think it should end there is because anti-racism work is often intellectualized, and and on some level, if we're just focusing on race, then we are still recreating the same systems. So another piece that's important to speak about here is my teachings, especially all of my teachings, but decolonial shadow work for white people in particular is rooted in indigenous earth medicine, is rooted in a deep relationship with Mother Earth. I tell my students, Mother Earth is your greatest teacher. I'm here to guide you, and she is your greatest teacher. And so when, for me, the highest vision is that we all return to being children of Mother Earth, that we treat each other as kin, that we honor the sacred earth ways. And this is what my elders have also helped me with, because I'll be honest, I show up in deeply compassionate ways with white people now, but I have not always felt this way in doing this work. And I'll be honest too, and I share this with my students now. There's times I get angry. There's times I get frustrated with white people. Still, like, I'm not, a Buddhist monk on the mountain, and I'm just like where I don't, I still have my own reactions and my own emotions, because I still have a lived experience in colonial capitalist patriarchy. and my loved ones and my family is impacted and are being kidnapped by ICE, so of course I'm going to have my emotions. And it is my elders in the Quero Inca lineage that help me to see things from Mother Earth's perspective and Mother Earth's love. And so I'm able to hold space differently now, but certainly there have been times where there's just so much fire in me. And I also, when I was in academia, did it in an intellectual way. And so I've learned from all of the ways that I did it wrong, and now as a medicine woman, I see that those ways, intellectualizing only, recreating the same systems where we just are unconsciously looping ourselves back into the same colonial paradigm, that is actually not helpful. There needs to be space where we create a new ancient paradigm, where we return to ancestral earth ways, where we also create the better ways, where we learn from all of our lineages and do it differently. So for me, that's the ultimate goal. And I don't believe that anti-racism work helps us with that. It begins the journey, but we need more to get to that place. And so that's where I feel, I'm honored to be able to guide people, white people, to get to that place. And I also want to share here that part of the work, and this is a very nuanced piece where white people need to understand that they're white and then be conscious of that, because it comes with immense privilege and unearned power. And then there needs to be space for, you also have pre-colonial ancestors, right? You also have traditions and rituals that existed pre-colonial times. And we need to make space for that, because we can't just leave it there, right? White people too need to reclaim, need to remember, and to do so in right relationship. So holding both, how do I dismantle? How do I decolonize? And also, how do I reclaim and remember? For me, that feels more balanced. For me, that's a place where that creates a world where we're all well, where we're all free, where we're all tending to Mother Earth.
Mm. You've talked about Mother Earth as our greatest teacher, and you also, can you say the name again of the fellow who guides your definition of decolonization? Was it
Dr. Michael Yellowbird? Yes.
Dr. Michael Yellowbird. Are there other teachers or revolutionaries that you've studied with, or that you've read, that inspire your work and that guide you in this work?
Yes. I would say that, yes, revolutionaries like the Black Panthers, particularly Assata Shakur. Also, Bell Hooks is a teacher. These are both literary teachers for me, and that really inspired my work. I would also say Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a spiritual activist, has inspired my work. I would say that if I were to name the big three of people that are not in my lineage, I would say that they are the big three of people who deeply believed in love, in justice and liberation, and who also spoke truth to power. And I feel like that's so needed right now. And it's a part of my own astrology, right? The love and the sweetness and compassion. And also there is a fire to me. And that's how my mothers were, my mother and my abuelita in particular. She in the 50s in Mexico was a very outspoken woman, and was also very political. political and speaking for social justice. And I just think about what the times were back then and just her immense courage. And my mom, even to divorce her husband, where that was like taboo, and you don't do that, right? She was one of the first Mexican women in our community who did that, who said, no, I'm not going to put up with this. And so those are my teachers as well, matriarchs who really stood up against the patriarchy, against power, and who are also very nurturing and loving.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing them with us. And I feel such kinship being an eldest daughter who was daughter of, eldest daughter of an eldest daughter, and very fiery matriarchs who
Mhm.
went their own path.
Mhm.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
I would imagine this must be particularly nuanced work for biracial people who may be
Mhm.
drawn to work. Like, and there's probably even nuances within a biracial identity that I couldn't understand. But like, I'm thinking, for instance, whether a person is white passing or not.
Yes.
So, how might someone who is biracial hold this work that you're doing, maybe perhaps a little bit differently than
Yes.
white folks would? Is this still this kind of work? Are they still invited into this work? I imagine yes.
Yes. I have had students that are biracial white who have joined decolonial shadow work and who have received much from it and healing from it. And so what I share with them is I don't make the decision about who qualifies. Like if you feel called and this is speaking to you, then I trust what is calling you and I trust your experience. And you're right, there is so much nuance there. But I just want to make clear, like, I'm not the decider of like who's, it's really for those that feel called. And yes, there's a different experience for biracial people, especially biracial white people, especially those that are white passing. So their lived experience may be more like a white person because our society treats them as a white person. So their internal experience may be different because they know my parent or my family is not all white, but society only sees me as white. And and so there's a lot of maybe inner conflict or feelings of not complete belonging. And at the same time, a biracial person who is white passing is granted more privileges. And so really the biracial white passing people who come to decolonial shadow work, they're already there. They already have that consciousness that they're granted more power, more privilege than their parent that is a Black Indigenous person of color, than their families that are Black Indigenous people. And they also see, I want to unlearn these things that have been passed down to me, and I want to show up in right relationship. I don't want to recreate that hierarchy. I don't want to recreate that sense of entitlement, domination, right? So these are all things that they're really, I feel so blessed because the people that show up to decolonial shadow work are just really deeply caring people about the world and who really care about integrity. I just feel so blessed to just be in space with them and that they're showing up. And so there is this, it's really hard work to do publicly
Mm.
because not everyone receives it. Not everyone is at that level of consciousness yet. But the people that do show up, it's just like, oh, I'm
Mm.
so grateful you're here and willing to do this work. And we need more white people like you. And so part of, coming back to something that you shared earlier, part of what we do in decolonial shadow work is the compassion for self and then compassion for other people, even white people who still are not at that level of consciousness. And I start by saying, firstly, I was not always at this level of consciousness. None of us were. And so it's important that we remember that. And instead of being judgmental and pointing the finger, let's have some compassion and even spiritually, let's leave doors and windows open for people to shift here. If we even psychologically, spiritually shut them out, then they're not going to come, right? They won't. So let's leave those doors, those windows open spiritually. Let's have compassion. Let's see that they were also programmed just like we were at some point in our life. And let's show up in relational ways so that those people that are still programmed can come here at some point. Right? Because we need that. We, like, as you said, we need more white people showing up in this work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so this might be a polarizing question that is hard to address in like a general way without a specific circumstance or example or like without more context. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the use of shame, uses of shame, given your sort of broad experience in like institutions, academia, and places of power versus, let's say, social movements online or social media. I recognize there are different sites of power, different kinds of power. And I'm not saying that publicly shaming people on social media, that's I'm not holding that up as an option or example. That's not relational, clearly. But even though you don't believe, you've stated in places, you don't believe in shaming white people for having inherited or internalized white supremacy culture, I do wonder if there are times when shame can be useful. And it seems like there's particularly more collectivist cultures who do employ shame or like taboo, right, as like a social glue. Or even when speaking truth to power, that there may be contexts where shaming or shunning could be useful, maybe even necessary. I mean, I guess I'm thinking especially part of the reaction to people working for ICE, this sort of movement towards not just like doxing, but I mean like making fun of them, the memes about them, the social shunning of like, oh, you work for ICE, you can't have lunch in this restaurant. That they won't let you. You know, do you think that some shaming or shunning could be useful, or if so, in what context?
Yes, thank you for this nuanced question. So I agree with you that there are some functions of shame socially, and I'm just seeing at those cultures, like even Mexican culture, right? There is even this sinvergüenza means like you have no shame, right? And that's, you don't want to be a sinvergüenza in our culture, right? And so there is some use culturally, socially for shame. These are appropriate, acceptable ways in our culture to be and to relate, and these are not. So socially, culturally, I do see that there is a function, and especially when we are speaking truth to power, there is a function there. I teach my students there's a difference between truth to power and how we interact with them versus how we interact with people in our communities and our families. And sometimes we don't make those distinctions because we are living in such polarized times, because we're living in times of collapse. And so it's harder to hold nuance. We're also living in times where we are, almost in this crisis mode. And so we're just in emotional reactivity sometimes, and social media amplifies that. And so I think that for me, I come back to that. There's a difference between social, cultural ways of being, and then in our own families and communities. I do think it's very effective in the example that you brought up with ICE agents. It has been very effective to shame them, you know? And even in my own community, Mexicanos, quote unquote, Latinos, you know, to say, you know, how dare you? These are your own people, and us shaming, that has been very effective. And you see it on their faces, you know? And so, yes to that, you know, yes to shaming Trump, right? People who are narcissists, and that actually works, you know? So there's a difference there in truth to power. And then shame, when I say I don't believe in shaming white people, I don't believe in shaming the white people that come into my space, right? Because now they're under my care, right? And so when I say I don't believe in shaming white people, I don't believe in shaming the white people that come into my space. You may feel some shame for the things that I teach, but that shame is not going to come from me. And I also teach my students that that shame or the guilt that you feel, that those are, you're feeling that for a reason. There's a healthy function to it, actually. And so let us look to that as teachers, and let us look to those emotion states as places where you are maybe operating out of right relationship, out of integrity. You wouldn't feel shame or guilt if you were in right relationship. And so it's sort of pointing you to where you can shift and where you can change your behavior. And I also teach my white students that it's important for us, for them to learn how to process those emotions, alchemize those emotions, because it's also not healthy to stay in the shame and guilt. It's also not healthy to show up for the decolonial movement out of guilt or out of shame, because then they may cause harm in unconscious ways. So this is why that unconscious, you know, unraveling an empire, unraveling of colonial empire is important, so that when you show up for your role, you are showing up almost clear, right? More intentional. You're showing up spiritually fortified as well. Because I also don't believe that white people, we certainly don't want white saviors either, because white saviors also cause a lot of harm. We need you to show up as relatives, which includes you being well, which includes you being resourced, also being honest about your resources. Am I hoarding resources, right? So these are all the layers that we work through. And for me, seeing white people as kin, as children of Mother Earth, like, that's not for me to decide. Mother Earth says we're all her children. Mother Earth provides for all of us, nurtures all of us. And so I look to her for how we need to be treating each other and how we need to be in relationship with each other.
And you mentioned that we are living in times of collapse. The listeners of the Numinous podcast know that we have dozens of episodes on collapse. And it's always kind of like I don't know, it's a delight to have a shared language around this time we're finding ourselves in. What else do your ancestors, or does Mother Earth or your other spiritual guides wish for people to know about connecting across difference, or about our possible futures in solidarity in our movements towards justice? Like, what do they say about the next steps in front of us?
Yes, thank you. I'm taking a deep breath with that question, because it's such a big question. I think the first part that I feel called to share is that it's important for us to be aware that this is not the end of the world. This is the end of colonial capitalist patriarchy. And so, even having that as a reminder for us when we feel that despair, when we feel like, oh my God, this is so much. We all have those moments. And then it's reminding this is not the end of the world. This is the end of the colonial capitalist patriarchy. And that's a good thing. That's healthy for all of us. And so let us welcome that collapse. And let us also remember that's where the ancestral earthways come in. This is an invitation to shift back to those ways of tending to the land, of being in communities rather than like in our silos, right? I mean, there was a time that I lived in a neighborhood where it's like everyone just stayed indoors. There were no children outside. Everyone just stayed in their home. There was no community. And I just couldn't even believe it coming from a barrio where it's just there's life and there's music and everyone's always outside. And so this is an invitation for a return to all of that. As difficult as some of these moments are, I don't want to bypass the reality. There is immense harm happening. We're living in times of genocides as well. Here in the so-called United States, there's, just right, ICE, and there's the government shutdown currently. So many families and children will lose access to food because they're losing SNAP benefits. And so there's immense harm and suffering. And also that invites us to show up in closer relationship with each other. That invites us to share our resources with each other, right? When we feel like there's no way out of this, it's because we're only seeing it through a colonial lens. We're only seeing it through the last maybe 500 years, not the thousands of years before that, right? And not even of what's possible. So also let us leave some space to imagine, to co-create. And for me, that's the main message that has been coming through as well, is when we feel despair, it is also because we're not allowing the spirits to help us. We're not allowing those pre-colonial ancestors to help us. And that is a colonial way of being too. When we think it's just up to us humans, that is a colonial lens too. There are spirits here to support us. There are plant kin and animal kin that are here to help us. And so we also need to make space for that. And what I notice is when I share that with my students, it's just, you can almost see the tension leave their body and their mind expands, because then they begin to remember we are meant to co-create.
Mm. The last question is always the same, and it's about how you're currently coping with grief and rage. And if you would be willing to tell us a little bit more about some of the special relationships, maybe with plants or animals or other practices that are supporting you with those feelings. So I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thank you. So today actually was a day that I was holding some anger because this past weekend, and where we are in the timeline as we record this past weekend was the No Kings protest here in the so-called United States. And you had a lot of mass groups of white people show up, which is amazing, right? It's amazing. And also, I, as a Chicana Mexicana, become angry when the work to provide resources for Black, Indigenous people of color doesn't have that mass support. And in my community, I saw a lot of white people come into the barrio and show up in protests, and I appreciated that. I appreciated that they came to the barrio so that my community, who are largely undocumented, sees the support. And so I was grateful for that. And it does something to our heart and spirit, right? When we see mass displays of protest. And so I do think it's helpful and beautiful for our spirit, for our psyche. And then we need to do more than that, right? We need to focus that energy. We need to create actions. We need to create mutual aid. We need to have white people who are showing up to fight ICE, right? So the next day, what happened after that protest is there was a swarm of ICE agents in my community who kidnapped the Mexicanos. And so I became angry because and sad and crying, like, where are they? Like, we're still here on the next day and we need your help. And so even just so there's so much I can say about that, but that's where I'm coming from. And this week was holding a lot of that grief and that anger. And so I am in constant communication with my ancestors, like, please help me hold this anger and grief. Because what I also know is if I stay in that anger and grief, then I'm not as kind and patient with my child. I'm not as kind and patient with my husband. Then even to myself, then I don't take care of myself. I miss a meal. I don't take that walk that's really helpful to me. I don't go outside and talk to the trees or look at the flowers and talk to them. And so I recognize I'm feeling so angry right now, and I allow that anger, and I ask the ancient matrix, come hold this with me. And even that feeling held by them, that begins to tend to the fire so that it doesn't combust in me or my family. And so that's the first layer, the recognizing of it, and then calling in spiritual support. And then I go out to this grandmother tree that I have here, that raised me. And on really hard days, I hold her, right? And she holds me back, and I just cry. And I don't even, I don't know what to say, but I just am so angry and I'm so sad. And I just hold her, and she holds me back. And then I just lay out on Mother Earth and I ask her to hold me. Nothing makes sense in the world right now. And I'm just so angry. Please hold me, Great Mother. Please hold me. And I bring some offerings to her, usually flowers, and help me hold this. And so I think that's a big part, especially for those of us who show up for the work, who are seeing this, who are the eldest daughters or the caregivers in our families and communities, that be allowing ourselves to be held within that is so important.
Thank you, Rocio, for sharing the ancient grandmothers with us so we can all hold it together. I can feel the earth rising to hold, and I thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world. Thanks for coming on the show to share it.
Thank you. It's been such an honor. Thank you.
So don't be fooled by the soft-spoken and thoughtful demeanor, right? Dra.Rocio is calling us forward. My fellow skin kin. If not now, then when? It's such a cliche, but it's true. If not now, then when? If not when the secret police are swarming your neighborhood, then when? If not when your government is bankrupting your farmers and passing policies that ensure intergenerational poverty for your country's teachers and healthcare workers and government workers, the backbone, then when? When do you move into a deeper commitment at a deeper level to unlearn colonialism? If not at the moment, when your democracy hangs in the balance, then when will be the right time to press pause on business as usual and commit time, resources, energy to the inner spiritual work of cultivating courage for the road ahead, that will require you to be brave and bold and require you to stay strongly connected to your dignity and integrity and your ancestral duty of care to future generations. And I'm not saying you have to be a frontline protester. I'm saying even just to be brave enough for strategic insubordination, to be the sand in the gears, if not now, connecting with other like-minded, good-hearted people in a program, for instance, like this, then when? Honestly, the best time to plant a tree, they say, is 20 years ago, but the second best time is today. So let your journey to unlearning colonialism deepen and become more rooted. Get support. Let this be an important healing for you, for your family tree, for your wider community, for the world entire. You'll find links to Rocio's website and her Instagram and her newsletter sign up, all those kinds of things in the show notes. And I encourage you to check out her current program, Decolonial Shadow Work. Registration closes October 31st, 2025. Now, rather than do the usual, the listener shout out today or the thank you for reviews and things like that, I would like to extend an invitation to my listeners, particularly those who've enjoyed my episodes on contact nutrition, and to those listeners who've maybe been a member of the Numinous Network, perhaps in the past, not right now, and at some point you got value out of my teachings about contact nutrition. If you don't know what contact nutrition is, welcome. It's one of the courses that I have on demand in the Numinous Network, Contact Nutrition 101. I get into the granular how-to of secure attachment. Anyway, my next book is coming out in fall of 2026, and it's about contact nutrition. And I've wanted to write this book for so long. If you've been around listening to my book launch episodes recently, especially for Spells of the Apocalypse, you know that I actually wanted to write this book as my second book, and it was rejected by my publisher. They wanted more magic stuff. But I've wanted to write some kind of response, honestly, between us, just between us. I wanted to write a response to the book, The 5 Love Languages, for so long because I have always disagreed so strongly with the premise of that book. I'm so happy to see more people talking about this in the past 5 years or so. Anyway, when I came across the concept of contact nutrition back in like 2016 or 17, I was like, oh, okay, if there were ever 5 things to know about how to make relationships work, this is what you need to know. Throw away that other garbage that has like no sense of critical analysis or no awareness of like trauma, power, rank, privilege, patriarchy. Chuck that in the garbage, burn that. Contact nutrition is so much more flexible, accessible, inclusive, and neuroaffirming once you understand that we all do need contact nutrition, but we need it in personalized doses and delivery formats, and they're very context dependent. And anyway, I am gathering input from people who've gotten value from the concept of contact nutrition so I can create this book that's going to be clear, concise, and highly shareable so it travels well via word of mouth. I want it to travel from friend to friend, beloved to beloved, therapist to client, mentor to mentee, amongst colleagues, amongst community groups. You know what I mean? I want it to be one of those little books you're like, here, read this. I want you to be on like your first date and be like, have you read Contact Nutrition? So if you'd like to come to my book jam, it's happening on November 30th. That's a Sunday at 5 p.m. on Zoom. It's free. It will be fun. I will be recording the meeting just for my own reference, but I will not use your name or anything you've said in my book unless I get your written permission. So don't worry about that. Your story is not going to show up in my pages, not even under a pseudonym, unless that's something you'd welcome, and I would talk to you about that afterwards. Anyway, you'll find the registration link in my show notes. And if you can't attend live or you don't really want to drop in, especially if you're like not used to the way we do things in the Numinous Network, we have like a very contact nutrition rich, numinous style, trauma informed, attachment oriented, somatically grounded kind of way of hosting meetings of people who don't know each other. But if you don't want to do that, or if you can't be there, but you would like to share with me like the most impactful thing you've learned about contact nutrition, the most memorable parts of the teachings or the practice that's made the most difference in your relationship or household. You want to tell me a story about that? Anything at all, really, that you'd like me to know. You can send me an email with Contact Nutrition Book Jam as the subject line. That way, when I or my admin help are searching, we can find it. Contact Nutrition Book Jam as the subject line. Send it to customerservice@carmenspagnola.com. That instruction again, customerservice@carmenspagnola.com as the recipient, Contact Nutrition Book Jam as the subject, or go to your show notes and click the link to register for the live event. You'll find the show notes in your podcast player, or you can go to numinouspodcast.com. That's my invitation. I hope you'll come to my party. Circling back now just briefly to October 31st, that's the day that Rocio's registration closes for Decolonial Shadow Work. It's also, as we know, Halloween, known by folks of various Northern European extractions as Samhain. We will be making witch ladders in the Numinous Network, one of my favorite ritual crafts from the Spirited Kitchen. So that's Friday, October 31st from 10 to 11 a.m. Pacific. The recording will be available for you to watch for a week afterwards. I'll be doing one-card oracle readings for people. So we'll do like a little ritual craft. It'll be a nice way to celebrate the turning of the wheel of the year. So come hang out with us in the Numinous Network for some cozy crafting and lots of contact nutrition to comfort you through the fall. Get all the details at carmenspagnola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.